Insipid, bad, awful, meek, nothing, terrible, dull, ineffective, woeful, concerning, passive, sufferable, horrific, embarrassing, frustrating, shit, criminal, dross, disgusting, disgrace, cowardly, pathetic, weak, horrendous, abject, negative, abysmal, anemic, unacceptable, dreadful, insane, soft, gutless, terrified, clueless, unimaginative, outthought, outfought, benign, wrong, defensive, shocking, scared, unbelievable. These are all words used by Tottenham podcasters this week to describe Spurs' performance against Arsenal in this weekend's North London derby. And I'll add one more to it, which is detached. This is how the team seemed to play from the occasion, detached, not really understanding the gravity of the situation, both in terms of what it means to the fans, but also in terms of our own momentum. The manager, from the expectations placed upon him in what he should be communicating to the players going into our biggest game of the season, notwithstanding cup finals. And the fans from the team. I think that there's a tremendous amount of disconnection and detachment from Spurs fans to this group of players, many of whom we like. I really like some of them. I like the young guys, Archie Gray, Lucas Berraval. I think they've got tremendous futures ahead of them, and they're nice guys. I like that Dom Solanke likes anime. I like that Richarlison is kind of nuts, and in a good way, and tries his best and loves the team. I love a lot of things about this team, but I can't connect to them, and I think that that's true of a lot of other people as well. So today we're going to be talking about that game. We lost 4-1, as you know already. Pitiful attacking stats. Every Spurs podcast was a stats podcast this week, and you've heard them all. Good stats and analysis on the Game is About Glory, Last Word on Spurs, an echo of Glory, the Cheese Room, and View from the Lane. But we've heard it. We've heard more and more stats this season about how bad we are, how poor we are, and they are not trending in the right direction. The North London derby is not a game that we've had much success in when we're playing away. But I don't think any of us quite expected what we saw. Our only goal was a pretty fortunate shot, a speculative shot from nearly at the halfway line. At least it gave those away fans something to cheer. And that's the best you can really say about the game. I had prepared some notes about what Spurs podcasters were saying last week in preparation for this, and I think it's just worth throwing them out the window, aside to say all that they really wanted was a performance, just some fight, just some, just some guts, just some heart, and they didn't get it. We wanted to break their momentum, and instead we boosted it. We gave Arsenal a lift. People expected a tight game, 0-0s, 1-0s in either direction. Instead, we were blown out of the water. Men against boys. So today, on Tottenham Hotspur, the Spurs podcast about Spurs podcasts, I'm going to analyse, in the wake of that North London derby defeat, the fallout. I'm going to look at who's to blame. This was a request from Hal over on Bluesky. Give him a follow if you don't already. I think it's a good question, and there's not much else to really dig into. Somebody else pointed out, what is there to say other than we were terrible? But I think looking at where we are apportioning blame right now is a good look at the fan base and where our heads are at. So, it's a little mind game here, little thought experiment, I guess, not a mind game. We were trying to play mind games in the lead up to the North London derby, but that seems to have backfired from Frank's comments towards Eberechi Eze. But yeah, a little thought experiment. Who do you think Spurs fans as a whole blame for this mess that we're in, as well as the performance against Arsenal? And who do you personally blame? And how aligned and how similar are those two things? So, from what I can see and what I can hear, Thomas Frank is taking the brunt of most of the blame from the podcasts I listen to. And like I said, there were about 16 or so that I went through yesterday and today, Monday and Tuesday of this week. Some of them ran some polls. The Fighting Cock said, Flav shared that about 39% of the people who responded to their poll were Frank out. An Echo of Glory had a similar poll, 60% Frank out. It's always questionable whether you can even trust this type of data after an event like we witnessed on Sunday. And I'm talking about it like it was like some sort of mass casualty, which it obviously wasn't, but kind of sums up what it means to us. Many podcasters are questioning the negativity that Thomas Frank showed with his lineup, what intent he was going for. Cy on So Spurs pointed out that he made every defensive choice that he could. Flat back five, 2 holding midfielders, and Richarlison up front as a body, presumably to help defend on corners and other set pieces, which I guess in retrospect worked. Didn't we concede 4 goals from open play? So I guess the plan worked. Jack on Rule the Roost again, similarly questioning how you can be this defensive going into a North London derby. And the North London derby itself it's massive, right? Mike on Wicked Spurs, he pointed out, he went with this back 5, not necessarily a back 3, the 2 holding midfielders, 1 up front. It's a little different to what we saw against Paris Saint-Germain in the Super Cup. And you don't mess around with lineups in the North London derby, was his opinion. I'm not sure I'm totally in agreement with that, but I think there's sort of context there. A manager who is in a rhythm and knows his players and trusts his players a bit more than Thomas Frank does right now, I think can tinker to move to a more defensive setup if other things are clicking. Instead, we took a team that was broken and we added more stress and to them by inviting on attacks. Arsenal, forget who said this, but Arsenal are not a team that you want to invite onto you. I think it might have been Graham or Glenn on Home and Away. The worst thing you can do is invite them onto you with no outlet. And that's what we had. We were just wave after wave of Arsenal attack, which is exactly what they want. That's their approach to defence, is to pin you back into your third and just grind you down. And we gave that to them. We surrendered that from the off. So the whole setup is on Frank. Suffering with Spurs, who was so pissed off with this performance, he recorded his first podcast since January 2024. He said it was like 20 months or something. That's how annoyed he is. Also pointed out that the only way that we were generating attacks was using Vicario, known for his bad feet, to start attacks from free kicks from our own half and hoping to get knock-ons like it was Sunday League. And I talked about the interpretation of Spurs as a mid-table club or mid-table tactics in my last podcast. And again, those negative feelings, that sense of doubt, I think was creeping in again as a result of this performance. I mean, the coaching staff must see this. Like Ricky, I forget if this was Ricky Sachs. I think it was Ricky Sachs. But the was it Ricky Sachs or Ricky from the Fighting Cock? I'm gonna leave this in. It was one of the two Rickies. All my notes say is Ricky. The coaching staff must see this. They must see the problems, but we're trending downwards. The performance is getting worse. It is the hope that we'll hang on until January and then try to fix it with signings. I don't know. I don't think you can do that in the modern Premier League. I don't think you can do that in any situation, any job, to just hold on when things are sliding without trying to intervene. It's just a general lack of vision. Steve on Wicked Spursy is questioning what he's trying to grow us into, and I think that's a problem. There's little in the way of buy-in from the fans and from the players because it's not really clear what we're trying to do. He's called a coward. Lauren on Hometown Glory, she said it was a strong word, but a lot of people are calling him a coward. There's problems there. Stubbornness, she pointed out. The central pivot of Bentancur and Paulinho. There's some coaching issues. All of the players are bad. It's not just one. All of them, there's some issues there. Many people calling back to Poch early in his start, to his Tottenham tenure. I mean, there's been a lot of managerial comparisons in general. Nuno, Mourinho, people like Ricky on the Fighting Clock, Flav. Fighting Clock? The Fighting Cock. Suffering with Spurs and Echo Glory. A lot of focus on Frank's messaging, which is interesting because I've been talking, I think I talked last time, about fan discontent with the communications and messaging and explanations coming out of the club. This time there's been a bit of a focus on Thomas Frank's communication style. I mentioned earlier the winding up of Eberechi Eze, a player who we could have signed. As pointed out by Todd on the Tottenham Depot. He gave bulletin board material in Todd's words and then laid a tactical stinker, and Eze scored a hat-trick. But there's this talk of risks that Frank discussed in, I think, his introductory video as Spurs manager, where I think he said something like, not taking a risk is a risk. And, on Sunday we took one huge risk in inviting Arsenal onto us and hoping that we could defend for 90 minutes. But, as people have pointed out, again, coming back to tactics, Jack Pitbrook on View from the Lane pointed out that as soon as you go behind, you're screwed with that type of tactical setup. You've got nothing in the team to dig yourself out and suddenly switch to playing a more progressive or in sort of attacking forward style to get yourself back in the game. But speaking of his communications, friends on YAPS plus others have been disappointed that Frank referenced this team finishing 17th last season. Especially as Stu on CADS pointed out, he said he wouldn't do that. He wouldn't talk smack about Ange and the previous manager and what they achieved last season. All of a sudden, when it suits him, and Frank's a person, he's just been humiliated in on a global stage. The North London Derby is one of the Premier League's premier games, and he's thrown in front of a bunch of savage English media. So mistakes happen when you talk into those stressful situations with emotions high and a million things running through your head. But for him to call back to that, I think it speaks to his mindset about what he's working with. I think he's almost suggesting that this team, in my opinion, is worse than the Brentford team that he was working with last year. And that's really, I think, quite disappointing for both the fans to hear, and I don't believe it personally, but also the players especially. What's he doing to build up here. It seems like he's knocking us down tactically, knocking us down emotionally. His use of language is interesting. I found Milo's dissection of it on The Game Is About Glory to be very interesting. Particularly looking at Frank's use of the word aggression and questioning whether he interprets it differently to us. I think to a certain extent, anything that a manager says in a press conference or soundbite or video or interview, and apparently he's been doing a lot recently. There's a few podcasters focusing on the amount of media coverage he's been getting recently. He's had his book that just came out too, of course. Some discussion, I think, from Jack on Rule the Roost about him being a bit small time in terms of being in disbelief at being interviewed by Chelsea and Manchester United in the same day. Maybe he's just excited, but I can see the point. And I don't agree with managers releasing books during their career. Poch did it, and I don't think that worked out well either. But yeah, coming back to my point, I don't think that you can really, especially English as a second language coaches, their use of words may not be as accurate as we'd like them to be. There's also an awful lot of, beyond that, which is somewhat xenophobic, I guess, of me. But there's also the meaning that we apply to words as fans, as modern day coaches versus coaches 10 years ago, to pundits. So pinch of salt, but yeah, go check that out. I think that's thought-provoking stuff. So in summary on I was about to call him Ange, but on summary on Thomas Frank, I'm angry. I'm really angry towards him. I'm angry after listening to the Extra Inches tactical breakdown. There's a bit of a reputation for the Extra Inches being overly negative recently, and I saw somebody on Reddit describe Nathan's situation as a tactical analyst and having called out the problems with Frank that we're now seeing in real time. That yes, he's like a prisoner or something. I can't remember the exact language used, but it must be frustrating to be in that situation as a professional but outside the club system analyst, seeing these problems, and yet the data people at Spurs don't see it. The decision makers at Spurs didn't see this coming, but you did. It must be galling. All right, let's look at the players. So these, I think, were, understandably the second most cited reason that things fell apart, or target of disappointment. And yeah, in contrast to Frank, where I was angry with the players, I'm not angry, I'm disappointed. You expect a bit of more intensity than we saw, at least. And that's an understatement. But yeah, the players, and there were different angles to the way that people were criticizing or targeting the players. In some cases, it was giving them an out, pointing to the injuries that we suffered, which are quite historic. I don't have the data to back that up, but for the second season in a row, numerous and disruptive. I found it sort of strange, though, that many people are pointing to a lack of Kulusevski, James Maddison in terms of creativity, and while that's understandable, somebody else pointed out, I forget their name, forget who it was, I'm sorry, but Xavi was on the bench, possibly our most creative player, and he wasn't used at all until the second half. You can, depending on your perspective, we either got worse, or from my view, there were at least more periods of attacking intent in that second half. A bit more forward thrust, which I think when he got on the ball, Xavi was responsible for. But they're both players as well that fans were questioning whether they might be sold, whether they're good enough for Spurs, whether we could upgrade there. So that I find strange. But especially Dom Solanke, whose absence he's been sort of deified in his absence. But I remember last season people criticizing his lack of goal output. I mean, people were talking about his hold-up play, sure, and maybe we'd be better with that. But he was targeted last year for not being good enough. But now they've seen a lot more of Richie. The grass is always greener, I suppose. There's been a lot of comparisons to Poch's and... Well, there's been a lot. There's been a few comparisons to Poch's and Redknapp's teams, namely suffering with Spurs, and whether any of those players that we saw on Sunday would make it into those teams. And I think it's highly likely that no. Maybe you could make an argument for Van de Ven or Romero. But I also had a little thought experiment on Bluesky where I shared a question, like, if you were to take one of those managers, anyone in the last 10, 15 years, and bring them forward to Sunday and ask them to put a team out, what would it look like? So, kind of their prototypical formations that they favoured, which often we saw in North London derbies. And I have to say, every single one of them was more appealing, more attacking than what we saw. And maybe that's a dumb comparison, but I think what it showed to me and what I'm trying to relay to you is that it obviously was possible to do something more competitive than what we saw. The players as well, in their defense, Ricky on the fighting cock. See, I remember which Ricky it was then. The players don't want to sit in a low block and wait for set pieces, and that affects their confidence. And you can call them prima donnas, you can talk about player mutinies, but these are highly paid people who have their own desires and their own thoughts and opinions about their careers and the type of player they want to be. They've signed a contract with Spurs, but they still exist as human beings, and maybe that's a bit dramatic, but if this isn't what they want to do, I do think they have a right to question if they want to still be at the club. And that's a problem. They're not going to suddenly change their minds if somebody reminds them that they're paid 150 grand a week. It's not how it works. They're people, and people tend to adjust somewhat to the environment that they're in and normalize it. They also have colleagues, friends, at the international level, maybe who they came up through youth systems with, who are at other clubs and are achieving things and are playing with confidence and style, and they're getting cheered. These guys are being asked to sit back and be passive and wait to concede in their biggest game of the season so far. It's awful. It must be an awful experience for them. And I have heard people talk about, I think Charlie on CADS, I'm going to call him out real quick, about the needing to see the players in a more Roy Keane-esque environment, hostile, demanding sort of standards and victories for wins. And the target of his focus was the player interviews that are conducted and put out for social media. And I have a couple of thoughts on this. He doesn't think they're appropriate. He doesn't want to see it. First of all, you don't have to engage with that content unless you want to. Second thing is, not all content is made for all people. They make a range of content. And I think somebody pointed out, possibly Jack on Rule the Roost, that they tend to sort of switch between content for older fans one year in the North London derby lead up, and then to younger fans the next year. The media team mixes up, and that makes sense. But also for me, yes, I want the environment and the players to be demanding more, to be demanding success from themselves, for greater standards. But they also need downtime. I'm a big believer in mental health and caring for yourself. And I don't think that having the players come in and be morose or angry is always the right approach after a loss. They do that themselves. They do need some levity. They do need a break. This is a highly stressful environment for many young men. And some of our players have talked about that environment in the past, Richarlison, for example. So I don't necessarily think that there's a direct correlation between lacks sort of culture as evidenced in social media interviews and our lack of on-field success this season. Plus, other clubs can do it. They do it too, not just Spurs. You can also point to some of the arguments about players being able to forget about it. Forget about the loss, go home and play on their PlayStations. Maybe they need that. I'm not angry about that. I sit with it all week, but I think that's unhealthy, quite frankly. I can't imagine if this was my job stewing over it, how that would make me perform better. So yeah, sorry to call somebody out specifically. It's been a problem. It's been a problem and a comment that's been stuck in my teeth all week. There are gaps in the squad. People have been pointing out. A lot of talk about Semenyo at Bournemouth, paying his break clause and all that other stuff to get him out of Bournemouth and into Spurs. I don't know personally if I think a left winger is going to solve our problems. We probably need a much better central midfielder to either pair with Bentancur next season or pair with Paulinho this season. Talk about strikers and their hold-up play. I know we've been linked with a couple. Again, I'm not sure if that's agent talk. My suspicion, having been a Spurs fan for a while, is that we'll wait for Solanke to come back. I can't see Richie moving on this January, personally. Lack of star power. A lot of people talking about how this is the first North London derby without Son and without Kane. Todd and the Tottenham Depot saying no stars, no teeth. Jay Harris on View from the Lane. And just like a quick comment on Jay before I reference his comments. He gets a lot of hate from Spurs fans. At the start of the season, myself included, I got sort of sick of the Brentford comparisons. I don't think he's necessarily always defenses of Frank. I just think he's got a much bigger pool of evidence to suggest that he's not a bad coach compared to Spurs fans. So he comes across as sort of artificially positive of Frank. And it is also somewhat at odds with the average Tottenham fan at the moment and how they feel about Thomas Frank. But yeah, Jay does feel that he is playing this squad. He's setting up the squad to be more conservative than his time at Brentford, suggesting that maybe he lacks a tool. A player, I don't know, like a Damsgaard, like a Tony or somebody else in Mbuemo. I don't know. But again, that might be the case. But you can do more with them, do more of this squad than what we've seen. There was a lack of professional pride on the pitch. Referenced by Rosa on Hometown Glory. Losing duels, the concentration after the break. Lauren agreed with her, saying the attitude stinks. And this, I mentioned earlier about, the players needing a break and all that type of stuff, and you could maybe wrap that up in the professional pride, but I think that they were not necessarily appropriately stimulated for the game, as we saw. Conceding within 60 seconds after the second half kicked off is criminal, especially in the North London derby. I mean, I was still at the bar paying for my beer when the goal happened. It's ridiculous. But yeah, the professional pride thing, I can see it. I'm not sure I fully agree with it, but I can see it. There was a long chat on Tottenham Home and Away as well about if the players care, and talking about which players may have some professional pride left. And yeah, another excuse for the players from Danny Kelly on View from the Lane. This message to the players not being good enough, not being trusted by Frank. And yeah, that comes back to what I said earlier about whether they want to stick around and do this. They have to trust themselves. They are elite players. They've beaten the system to get where they are. But yeah, we're a few players off a top team. Jack and Roost pointed this out, but we're better than this. We are. These players are better than this. Tottenham are better than this. Going a level above, we've looked at the playing staff and the coaching staff. There was also a fair amount of criticism thrown at Daniel Levy. And, maybe old habits die hard. There's a point to it. I think there is some truth to the way the club was run in the last few years under Levy and under Enoch. Russ on Last Word on Spurs, blaming the recruitment over many years under Levy, somewhat ties into what I just said about the players and people not thinking the players are quite up to snuff. Whether or not you consider Frank to be a Levy appointment, a Lange appointment, a Paratici appointment, a Venkatesham appointment, an Enoch appointment, a Lewis appointment, there is some people saying that it's on Levy. It's his last one, and maybe that can be used as a get out of jail free card from the Lewises. Mike Lee pointed out it was Levy's last appointment, Marcus Buckland on Last Word on Spurs, that they may point to this and get rid of him, and you know, whether that be now, whether that be January, whether it be next year, and they can, you know, blame it on him, not on them, not on the new regime, and get somebody else in. And if I'm honest, there's sort of this nagging worry in the back of my head that they're going to repeat what they did when they first took over Spurs way back when George Graham was in charge. Similarly, a negative manager, hated by fans due to his connections to Arsenal. And the first appointment they made was to bring in Glenn Hoddle on. I can absolutely see Enoch, who are the Lewises, getting rid of Frank and bringing back Pochettino, a manager well liked in general by the fan base. I can absolutely see that. But if you want more discussion about Daniel Levy, sort of the sporting director models, I have episodes on those that you can go back to. There has been some criticism of Langer and the new ownership model, the need to make better decisions per Flav on the fighting cock. People saying that, you know, Brentford, Bournemouth are good at recruitment, we're not. Last Word on Spurs, suffering with Spurs. Others actually going the different direction and not necessarily saying he was a Levy choice. Lauren on Hometown Glory, the guest on the Spurs Show, I forget which one it was, Sai on So Spurs, believing that there being possibly some shared accountability between the Lewises, Venkatesham, Langer, Paratici, might benefit Frank and might give him a bit more time, actually. So it's interesting that people are interpreting that period of time at Tottenham in different ways. I did note that Dan Kilpatrick, Spurs fan, journalist, now editor on View from the Lane, says he doesn't blame anyone at Spurs, believing that Frank was worth taking a punt on. And this was the only person I found that didn't blame the leadership at Spurs. Maybe people who were silent on the matter don't blame them, but I do wonder if this is Dan's position in the media and having a much more broad perspective than the average Spurs fan would. And also hearing perhaps a lot more about Thomas Frank in his career to date than perhaps the average Spurs fan would. But also acknowledging that he isn't right for Tottenham. Like, they don't blame him. He was worth a risk. Plenty of other top teams, I mentioned Chelsea, United, I think Liverpool as well, all looked at Frank. Villa, I think, interviewed him. We were the ones who pulled the trigger, and maybe it just was a misalignment between our values, to dare us to do, etc., and what he wants to achieve as a manager. So lots of blame to move around. I was going to have a little section on Arsenal, but I've just got nothing in the tank to discuss that lot. Stuff on Eze, Arteta. I mean, there's a gulf between us, as all the podcasts acknowledged. Very matter of fact and solemn acknowledgement that they'll probably win the league this year. And this will be the first time for many new fans, if that does happen, people who've started supporting the club in the last, what was our last win? 2004, something like that. It's not so bad. It depends on if it's continuous, Is this Arsenal winning the league before City come back or Liverpool come back next year? Or we mount a title challenge. Who knows? Those Wenger years were rough. You can deal with one year of them winning the league. Trust me, you've done it with Chelsea for so long. I know perhaps the relationship with Arsenal and the antagonism is perhaps much greater than Chelsea, but you'll get through it. Us long-time fans have dealt with it. The question is whether or not we're going to be fighting them when we take them back to White Hart Lane or when we show up at the Emirates. That's the question. That's what we need. I've often said, and I think I've said it on this podcast, if they win the league, the one thing I want is to not give them points. I'm so pissed off they did that. Looking ahead, I mean, I don't know. PSG, it's going to happen tomorrow. I don't know if you'll get time to listen to this before it. It's a free hit. Jack Pitbrook. View from the lane. Some talk about how you fix it. No one really knows. People want to see a single pivot. People want to see a consistent team. I personally believe that the confidence of the players needs to be worked on. They need to show for the ball. They need to believe in themselves and make plays happen. Fulham is must win. Number of podcasts pointed that out. It could be pretty aggressive though if PSG becomes messy. The Fulham game on Saturday is a late game, so I think it's 8 p.m. in the UK, so fans will be drinking. It's a London derby, so they can get back home. London derby. It's a London game. But yeah, that. Well, I guess it's a home game, so it doesn't really matter. They're not travelling to Fulham. My mistake. But yeah, an Echo of Glory pointed out that it could get pretty bad in the stadium if things aren't going well on Saturday. If we go a goal behind, that could be nasty. And then looking forward, we've got Newcastle and Brentford coming up, which are a late game at Newcastle in the middle of the week, and then Brentford I think will be up for playing Thomas Frank, and they'll be wanting to get one over their former coach. So let's try to wrap all this up. Compared to, you could compare this to the one sunny day is weather. Many months of it is climate comparison. One bad day, one bad game, which can happen, is form. Many is who we are, and we're getting worse, as very well said by Mike Lee on the Spurs Show. Didn't talk too much about the fans, I guess, today in terms of not a blame, but as an active participant in Spurs' current situation. Frank has talked about it a lot, and I think that's probably which has created that disconnect between us and him, the need for us to back the team. There has been some podcasters turning their ire towards their fellow fans, some fan-on-fan violence. I think Jim on So Spurs talked about how the minority of fans who are Ange Postecoglou fans, yes, we're still talking about Ange. You can complain about us talking about Ange still, but any podcaster who says that, I want you to go back and figure out if you've talked about Poch this season, if you talked about Mourinho, Nuno, Conte. Spurs fans do a lot of looking back and comparisons. Yeah, Jim talked about how there maybe is a minority of Ange supporters who have their knives out for Frank, which is, making it harder for him. Maybe in terms of like fan atmosphere. And I can't talk about the stadium. I'm not there. I wish I was. I'm not. I wish I had some kind of magic power to click my fingers and be there every week. But I live thousands of miles away. I think the issue is not so much that they're fans of Ange. I think that what you're seeing is that the most sort of strong supporters of Ange Postecoglou's ideals and achievements at Spurs were possibly amongst the greatest believers in the to dare us to do philosophy of Spurs, and had a low tolerance for pragmatic football, right? It's not that they're Ange Postecoglou fans, it's just that we've had this flip-flop from Ange to Frank, two very different styles, and it's highlighted that sort of minority and those sort of qualities I just pointed out. Flav Ricky on the Fighting Cock and Rosa on Hometown Glory is talking about the fans, did make a few unaliving jokes, and you could say that it's a little gauche. I think it emphasizes the meaning of this game to fans and the recent results and the impact they're having on us. And a little bit of gallows humor, a little bit of self-deprecating humor, I think is not warranted, but I think is definitely understandable. There is a way to be funny or to inject some humor into these podcasts, even while this sucks. And I'll commend anybody who's trying to bring some levity to the content they're trying to produce. I think it was more impactful that Flav was not up for a roast dinner when he came home on the Sunday, and we all know from recent discussions how much a roast dinner means to him. That's my guarantee that I'll never get invited back on the lab, or invited to talk to him. So we live with it. On that point about the meaning to the fans, we live with it. That's our role. That's our job in all this. Is we carry the torch. We are the standard bearers for Tottenham Hotspur over many generations. We feel it in the bar, we feel it at work, we feel it at school, and amongst our family group chats, but we deserve better. I strongly believe that. You believe that. It's obvious. We deserve better than this. You can talk about the money we pay, but for me, it's more about the emotional commitment we make to this club. Every fan base deserves something to hope for, and I think that we're in a kind of a hopeless situation right now. I would really strongly recommend you go listen to Lauren's 3 Rules for Derbies on Hometown Glory for some encapsulation of what we expect from the Arsenal game every year. It resonated tremendously with me. So I started this podcast with a list of words. Detachment is my sense. Yours might be different. I then moved on to looking at who might be to blame. And honestly, I think you probably know the answer to this. It's everything. I don't want to be too much of a doomer about it, but it's everything. Frank is a problem right now. The players are a problem right now. Daniel Levy was a problem. His legacy lives on in that regard. Enoch and the Lewises are a problem. Langer's a problem. Paratici's a problem. I'm a problem. You're a problem. Everyone at Spurs is a problem right now. Chirpy's a problem. We need some rebuilding. And that's going to come from the players and Thomas Frank. Maybe the board in January. But we need some hope. We need something to get behind. If you're going to play defensive football, we need to fucking win a game. It can't be this. It can't be registering 0 shots from inside the box. It can't be, the number of passes through balls and direct passes and plays that we're seeing. It just, beyond it being the antithesis of the Tottenham way, whatever you want to describe that, even for other football clubs, this wouldn't be fun. It doesn't matter that it's Tottenham. This could be Aston Villa. It could be Everton. This isn't fun. And it's seeping through us. It's metastasizing through us. I hate to end on such a negative note, but I can't think of how to be positive right now other than to say, enjoy what you can about Spurs. Don't let it break you. Be pissed off. Engage with those emotions. Think about what it is that's pissing you off specifically, not the aggregate. Oh, it's just Tottenham. No, there's going to be something. Think about that. Channel yourself into other things to keep you going. Spurs will always be there. Do what you can. Don't get too despondent about it if you can. But on the other hand, if it does become too much, if the emotional weight of Spurs as well as everything else that's happening right now is too much and you don't feel yourself, you don't feel right, talk to somebody, find somebody. If you can get to a therapist, get to a therapist. Do something. Don't let a malaise creep in and become your life. You've seen with Tottenham what can happen if you don't step in. Look after yourself. You're worth it. The Spurs community is challenging at times, but I think we can be supportive when we need to be. So speak to somebody you trust. My name's been Ian. It still is Ian. Hopefully will continue to be Ian. This has been Tottenham Hotspur. You can follow the show on Bluesky at tottenhamhotspur.bsky.social. Send me an email, tottenhamhotspur@gmail.com. I hope to come back to you soon with some more uplifting content. I hope that you enjoyed this this dissection of Spurs, this surgical dissection of this rotting corpse of Tottenham Hotspur. Somebody's going to clip that out. Yeah, keep going. We got plenty more football to watch this season, so don't break yet. We got plenty of time for that. And keep listening to Spurs podcast and keep making Spurs podcast. Up the Spurs.